Not everyone who hurts you has a personality disorder. Some people are just assholes, and you're giving them too much credit by pathologizing their cruelty. We've medicalized bad behavior. Your ex isn't a narcissist, your boss isn't a sociopath, your mother isn't borderline, they're just terrible people, and calling it a diagnosis lets them off the hook. Because here's the thing about labels. They imply something clinical, something beyond their control. A narcissist can't help it, right? It's a disorder. They're wired wrong. Pour them. Bollocks. Most people who treat you like rubbish aren't mentally ill. They're just selfish. They're not incapable of empathy. They just don't care enough about you to use it. There's a difference, and that difference matters. Think about it. When someone cuts you off in traffic, you don't say they have antisocial personality disorder. You say they're a prick, and you move on. But when someone close to you behaves badly, suddenly we're diagnosing. Suddenly we're on Reddit reading about covert narcissism and love bombing and trauma bonds. Why? Because accepting that someone you loved, someone you trusted, someone you let into your life is just genuinely a terrible person, that's uncomfortable. That means you made a mistake. That means you ignored red flags. That means you chose wrong. And that stings. So we reframe it. We medicalize it. We turn it into a diagnosis. Because if they're a narcissist, it's not your fault for staying. You were manipulated by someone with a personality disorder. You're a victim of pathology, not poor judgment. But here's what the ancient philosophers understood that modern therapy culture forgot. Some people are just bad, not broken, not disordered, not traumatized into cruelty, just bad. One wise bloke once wrote that some people exist as obstacles, not because they're ill, not because they suffered, but because that's who they chose to be. He didn't diagnose them, he didn't psychoanalyze them, he just accepted it and moved on. And that's the part we're avoiding, the acceptance. Because acceptance means responsibility. It means you have to look at why you tolerated it, why you excused it, why you stayed when every instinct told you to leave. Your ex didn't gaslight you because they're a narcissist. They lied because lying got them what they wanted, and you let them. Your boss didn't manipulate you because they're a sociopath. They exploited you because you were exploitable, and you stayed. See, diagnosing them is easier than examining yourself. If they're disordered, you're innocent. If they're just assholes, you have to ask harder questions, like why your boundaries were so weak, why your self-respect was negotiable, why you mistook cruelty for complexity. Here's the uncomfortable bit. Most narcissist accusations come from people who refuse to admit they were just treated badly by someone who didn't care, not someone incapable of caring, someone who chose not to care about you specifically. And that hurts more, doesn't it? Because if they're a narcissist, at least it wasn't personal. They treat everyone like that. It's the disorder talking. But if they're just an asshole who treated you badly while treating others well, that means something about you specifically wasn't worth their effort. That's the truth we're avoiding with all these diagnoses. Now look, clinical narcissism exists. Antisocial personality disorder is real. Borderline personality disorder is a legitimate diagnosis. But statistically, it's rare. About 1% of the population. Maybe 2% if we're generous. So when everyone's ex is a narcissist, everyone's boss is a sociopath, everyone's mother is borderline, the math doesn't work. What's more likely, that you've surrounded yourself with the rarest personality disorders known to psychology, or that you've surrounded yourself with selfish people and you're calling it pathology because it's easier than calling it what it is? Selfishness, cruelty, indifference, greed, ego, spite. These aren't diagnoses, they're choices, and treating them as disorders removes accountability, theirs and yours. Here's what happens when you stop diagnosing and start accepting. You stop waiting for them to get help. You stop thinking love or patience or understanding will fix them. You stop making excuses, because arseholes don't need therapy. They need consequences. And you stop seeing yourself as a victim of their pathology. You start seeing yourself as someone who tolerated unacceptable behavior, which is harder, but it's also more empowering. Because victims of narcissists can't do anything, but people who tolerated arseholes can leave. One philosopher said we suffer more in imagination than in reality. We're imagining complex psychological warfare when the reality is simpler and uglier. They treated you badly because they could. Because you let them. Not because they're disordered. Because they're selfish. And you were available. So what do? Stop diagnosing. Start discerning. Ask yourself, is this person treating me badly because they literally cannot help it, or because they've chosen not to care? If it's the first, compassion and distance. If it's the second, just distance. No diagnosis needed. No trauma bond to untangle. No 6-month recovery from narcissistic abuse. Just a simple recognition. This person is terrible, and I'm leaving. You don't need to understand why they're terrible. You don't need their childhood trauma to make sense. You don't need a clinical framework to validate your decision to walk away. You just need to recognize that some people are awful, and you deserve better than awful. Here's the test. If they treat their boss with respect, their friends with kindness, strangers with courtesy, but they treat you like rubbish, they're not a narcissist. They're just an arsehole who doesn't value you, and that's actually easier to solve than a personality disorder. You just leave. No 12-step recovery program, no subreddit support group, no YouTube rabbit hole about covert manipulation tactics. Just the simple recognition that you were with someone who chose to treat you badly, and you're choosing not to tolerate it anymore. That's not trauma, that's discernment. Most of the people you're calling narcissists are just ordinary levels of selfish, and you're calling it pathology, because ordinary selfishness feels too mundane for the pain you experienced. It feels like the hurt should match some grand diagnosis, some clinical explanation for why it hurt so much. But sometimes the explanation is simple. You loved someone who didn't love you back. You trusted someone who didn't deserve it. You gave your peace to someone who didn't value it. That's not narcissistic abuse. That's just a rubbish relationship with a selfish person. And that's okay. You're allowed to have made a mistake without it being pathological. You're allowed to have chosen wrong without it being manipulative. You're allowed to leave without needing a diagnosis to justify it. Not everyone's a narcissist. Some people are just arseholes. And the sooner you accept that, the sooner you stop giving them the power of pathology. The sooner you take back your own. Because here's what no one tells you. Calling them a narcissist keeps you connected to them. It keeps you analysing, researching, understanding. It keeps them in your head. But calling them an arsehole and moving on, that's freedom. So stop diagnosing people who are simply cruel. Stop giving clinical weight to ordinary selfishness. Stop turning your poor judgment into their pathology. They weren't a narcissist. They were just terrible. You weren't abused by someone with a personality disorder. You were mistreated by someone who chose to mistreat you. So tell me, have you been calling someone a narcissist to avoid admitting you just chose badly? Comment below, and basically I'll be reading, and probably disagreeing with half of you. Overthinking Department, where we call arseholes arseholes. Open 24/7.